Well, there are two big ones at the moment, Beverly, that are very much in focus. The first is, of course, the agreement with Papua New Guinea. Now, that is still being negotiated at this stage. And then separately, there's the agreement which was already signed by the Foreign Minister and Vanuatu's Prime Minister in December last year, but which has not yet been ratified by that country. So two security deals, one with PNG, one with Vanuatu, both in their own way politically contentious in those Pacific Island countries, but which enjoy bipartisan support here in Australia. So it's a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah. Let's look at the PNG one firstly. They've delayed signing the security pact at this point. What are the issues that they are working through?
Well, we're not exactly sure what the precise issues are, but they seem to feed from some of the political unrest that we've seen in PNG in the wake of its decision to sign an agreement with the United States. Now, we also haven't seen the text of that agreement yet. We should see it in the next few weeks, but that proved very politically contentious because there was a suggestion in the lead up to that being signed that Papua New Guinea might allow a form of exemption from PNG courts for US troops, and also would give the US untrammeled access to many of its military facilities. Now, PNG's political leadership has been quick to try and quash those suggestions, saying that there will be no exemptions provided to US troops and that US forces will only be allowed into PNG facilities with the explicit agreement and permission of the PNG government. But it caused not only protests in the street, but also quite a bit of political controversy, with some people in PNG arguing that PNG was effectively siding with the US against China in a new Cold War and abandoning its long tradition of non-alignment. So that debate seems to be shaping the debate over the Australian, or the negotiations over the Australian agreement. Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister James Marape said not long ago that negotiations would have to continue for quite a bit longer in order for him and for the Parliament to be satisfied that the agreement wouldn't encroach on PNG's sovereignty in any way. Now, originally, the thinking was that would be signed around June, around the middle of the year. That now looks like it will be pushed back by at least, perhaps a couple of months, perhaps even longer, while they work on the text. So we don't know exactly when it's going to be signed. Certainly PNG isn't saying that it's going to kill it stone dead, but it does seem to have been delayed.
Yeah. The Vanuatu one too needs to get through Parliament. How difficult is that going to be in terms of addressing some of the issues that some in Vanuatu have with this security agreement with Australia?
Yeah, there are real echoes in Vanuatu of the debate in PNG. Now, this is a slightly different situation because in PNG, as we were describing, it hasn't been signed yet, so it's still in the process of negotiation. In Vanuatu, it's more complicated because the agreement has actually been signed. It was signed by Prime Minister Kausikau and Foreign Minister Wong in December last year, but it hasn't yet been ratified in Vanuatu by either the Council of Ministers or by the Parliament, and in Australia by the Parliament. Now, in Australia, it's going to be a formality. It'll have to go through a committee process that all treaties have to go through, but there's strong bipartisan support for it, so it's not going to be difficult. In Vanuatu, it's a really different story because several senior ministers are, one, angry that the Prime Minister didn't consult them before charging ahead just weeks after winning power and signing this agreement, and two, in some cases, are worried that the agreement's scope is simply too wide, that it's too favourable to Australia, that it would give Australian troops to quick and easy access to Vanuatu and potentially access to Vanuatu's IT systems very easily, and that it's not a balanced document. Now, that document is in the public domain. It is very broadly worded, but Ismail Kausikau, the Prime Minister, says that a lot of those ministers who are opposing it are simply misunderstanding the scope, and that the agreement is not nearly as sweeping as they think it is, and that Vanuatu, again, would have to sign off on everything or anything that happens underneath it. But I'm told that several ministers, including the foreign minister, are uneasy with the document as it stands. And most close observers in Vanuatu seem to think that it will have to be reworked one way or the other in order to get it over the line, both through essentially Vanuatu's cabinet and then through the parliament as well. Now, that could, throw some difficulties up, particularly for Australia, and particularly given the agreement has already been signed. But given the political climate in Vanuatu right now around these questions of sovereignty, it does seem like the most likely outcome.
It is interesting that these issues of sovereignty come up as you talk about, and you've seen protests in a number of these nations. But there are pacts like this happening with China, the US, New Zealand. Do they raise the same issues for locals all the time?
They often do, yeah. I mean, the security agreements in the Pacific are always contentious or often contentious whenever they involve outside players. Now, that's particularly the case when it involves China or, to a slightly lesser extent, the United States, because they're such big beasts and because people in those Pacific Island countries are very worried about the prospect of conflict and of being drawn in some way into it. Of course, the most contentious agreement is the only one that China has struck with countries in the region, which is with Solomon Islands. That's if you put aside a police and security agreement it struck about a decade ago with Fiji. And that one has been hugely contentious and has fed into protests there. The ones that aren't contentious are the ones that are signed with other Pacific Island nations. So it passed with almost no fanfare when PNG and Solomon Islands signed a pact not that long ago. But that's because for most Pacific Island countries, signing agreements with fellow Pacific Island countries is never a contentious prospect. It's always the involvement of outside powers that draws political controversy. Yeah. Countries like Australia and to a lesser extent New Zealand occupy this slightly uncomfortable middle ground, if you like, because of course Australia is a Pacific Island Forum member. It is a member of the Pacific, but it's also very different from those small Pacific Island states. It has a far larger military than those Pacific nations that maintain standing forces. And of course, it's not a disinterested observer in the sense that it's Australia is a major US ally and has very much shown its colours in that front. So agreements with Australia, moderately contentious often. Agreements with the United States and China, often deeply contentious and contested. Agreements between small Pacific Island countries, far less contentious.
Indeed, really interesting. Good to talk, Stephen. Thanks for your time.
No problem. Thanks, Beverly.